Well, many people are aware of the recent headlines with all the student protests that are happening all across the USA. The protest, as far as I can find out, they started out at Columbia, and on April 18th, there were students that were arrested. And then what happened was these protests spread to other universities. So a lot of people are thinking, is this a repeat of what happened in the 1960s, where we saw these large protests and we saw a lot of political action taking place? Now, the protesters are protesting some of the events and actions that are taking place in the Middle East. So it is a very polarized issue, but it is kind of, there's a lot of events and a lot of astrological transits that are taking place, and it leads me to ask, and I talked about this on a recent episode of the Psychic News Report, is how is this summer going to pan out? Is this going to be a very active political summer, or is it going to be quiet? So we're going to be taking a look at all of the astrological transits. We're doing really a deep dive because we're going to be looking at the Saturn transit. We're going to be looking at Sati Sati in the USA chart, and we're going to be exploring a lot of other factors there. So for those of you that are new to my channel, make sure you like and subscribe. By the way, I practice Vedic sidereal astrology, which is the astrology from ancient India. So your sign may actually be different using this type of astrology. The goal is 10,000 subscribers. I do feel like we're almost halfway, so thank you all for your support. If you're interested in a personal private reading, check for details down below in the description box. Also, I just mentioned the Psychic News Report, but it's a new project that I'm a part of with 5 other talented individuals. So it's quite exciting. Um, the topics that we're bringing up, and it's really, mixing this idea of divination and news. So if you're interested, check in the description box down below. So let's go ahead and talk about the background of what's going on with these protests first, and then we're going to talk about the astrology that's really taking place. So, like I said, as far as I can research, I did read a New York Times article where they did talk about April 18th was an important date for these students that were protesting about events in the Middle East at Columbia University. And apparently, there were a few students or many students that were arrested. This kind of was a trigger for other protests that are happening across the country. There's protests happening at universities like USC, Yale, Princeton, Ohio State, Emory University, ASU, UT Austin, and these weren't even all the universities. Okay, I just listed a few of the big ones. Like I said before, many people remember the the political action and the turmoil of the 1960s. So people are kind of wondering, is this going to be like a repeat? Especially with astrology, we talk about reincarnation and karma. So a lot of us are kind of wondering what's happening with this. Is there more that's going to develop out of this? So that's what we're really going to be taking a look at today. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about to give you a little bit more background before we talk about the transits next month, let's talk about the overview here first. So January 2023, that's when Saturn entered the 11th house of Aquarius. So this is the overview. These are going to be the 3 transits that I'm really focused on. The second, which is the more recent, was the eclipses that happened on March 25th and April 8th. And I made videos on those, so you probably just can check a few videos ago. Um, there was a eclipse in the lunar eclipse was in Virgo, and then the solar eclipse was in Pisces. And then the upcoming transits that are happening is with Mars. So on May 18th, you want to mark your calendar on that one. Mars is going to be conjunct Rahu. And then May 25th, Mars is going to cross the eclipse degree of the April 8th solar eclipse. And that's usually a trigger of important events that are going to happen. Now, we're going to talk about all of these. So we're kind of doing a little bit of a deep dive. So let's talk about Saturn and Aquarius first. And, Saturn and Aquarius, it first started in January of 2023, and it's going to occur in March of 2025. So let me go ahead and I'm going to take you to, let's see, I'm going to show you one of the charts here. Let me just pull up the paint so I can draw on it. But this is the USA chart right here. So this is a USA chart. And so Sati Sati basically, Well, Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius, and I'm going to talk about Sadi Sati in a moment. But it entered there January of 2023. It's going to be there till March of 2025. And in the USA chart, you'll see it's going over the natal moon. This is a really intense transit right here for the USA. So it's already kind of, giving us the background of what's happening with all these student protests. When Saturn's going over your moon in your chart, it's actually considered like a really low point, usually in one's life. There's a feeling of isolation. There's a feeling of sometimes a loss of reputation that can take place. We'll explain that a little bit more in one of the slides. But this is the transit that's happening. And depending on what your ascendant sign is, the USA ascendant sign is Scorpio over here, but depending on your ascendant sign is going to be what house it's transiting through. So let me go ahead and let's go ahead and put up the presentation one more time here. So basically, Saturn's going through the fourth house of the USA chart, but I want you to know it's going through the 11th house of the natural zodiac. So the 11th house, this is like the world, if we want to think about the world chart. Now, the 11th house represents things like markets, the masses, people, the economy. So that's why I feel like there's a lot of, we're talking about around the world, there's a cost of living crisis. So, I mean, this is really impacting a lot of people. The 11th house represents political movements, rallies, large assemblies. Obviously, these protests have something to do. So not only the USA chart with it going through the fourth house and Sadi Sati, but the natural 11th house has to do with this. What's interesting too is Saturn can represent an oppressive force. So, the 11th house can represent like the people in a lot of ways. So if you want to think like your everyday people, your neighbors, just like everyday people that work normal jobs. So when Saturn's going through it, Saturn's kind of like this oppressive energy that's happening. So people are feeling the weight of this cost of living crisis. They're feeling the weight of all these things that are happening. So this is kind of the background. Okay. And then Saturn can also bring somewhat of a political suppression as well. So that's one of the things also that put out there that people might feel like maybe their voices aren't being heard on some level. Now, the thing that Saturn is really bringing up, the karma that it's bringing up, isn't really going to be fully healed until March of 2025. That's what I want to bring up. It's bringing up a lot of these karmas. So I feel like this summer, we're still in the thick of this transit. So there's still a lot of these karmas that are coming up. And let's take a look at the next slide because we'll talk about what the USA Sadi Sati situation is. Now, we did talk about that when I looked at the slide a little bit. The Sadi Sati is going along the same with the transit we just talked about. But whenever Saturn enters the same sign as the natal moon, it just represents 2.3 years of, well, the Sadi Sati is actually 7.5 years, but we're just talking about the 2.3 years where it's like at the maximum intensity. Okay, so Sadi Sati is associated with obstacles, delays, misfortune, loss of reputation and status, financial difficulties, isolation. So like I said, USA is at a low point according to the astrological chart. Okay, so could the student action just be kind of a response of what's happening? Yes, definitely this could be, like a response to this energies. Now let's talk about the eclipses. And let me show you where the eclipses happened really fast right here. Oops, let me go ahead and change that for you all. And let's go ahead and clean up the chart a little bit. Now, the eclipses, remember, those happen on March 25th and April 8th. And so the first eclipse happened over here in the sign of Virgo. The second eclipse on April 8th happened over here. This is the eclipse axis. Okay, let's talk about these eclipses. Now, this is important for the USA chart because it's impacting the 11th house and Saturn in the USA chart. Okay, so just remember that as we're going through this, we're really building up this narrative. So the 11th house, again, the people, the masses, and then we have Saturn in the 11th house, the natal Saturn's in the 11th house of the USA chart, but that's being stimulated by the eclipse. So that's something to consider with all of what's going on right now. Now let's go ahead and take a look at This again. Okay. So the axis that the eclipses happen on in the natural zodiac is the 12-6 axis. So we're talking about when we're talking about sixth house, we're talking about things like disharmony, conflict, imbalance, debt, enemies, social justice is even included there. Um, 12th house represents losses, hidden enemies, reality slipping away, forgiveness, the past. So a lot of things are being brought up from the past with these eclipses. Okay. So the eclipses, if you want to think about it, they're dredging up all these things associated with the 12th and the sixth houses. Okay. So they're dredging all that up. In the USA chart, you'll notice it's hitting the 11th house with Saturn in the 11th house. So it's bringing up a lot of heavy, difficult karmas. Now, also consider that the April 8th eclipse, the total solar eclipse, the path of totality was seen in North America. So it actually cut across the USA. And that usually suggests there's a really strong intensity for the country that actually, where the path of totality actually goes through, suggesting very, very powerful karmas being released for the next 90 days. Isn't it interesting that the solar eclipse, it happened on April 8th? And then, by April 18th, we were having all these events with the protests in the universities. I feel like this is a total summer this is going to be an intense summer of a lot of activity. This could be just the tip of the iceberg with all these student protests that are happening right now. Let's talk about the next slide, the Mars transits that are happening in May, which is going to be next month. But I want to give you all a heads up on what's happening. So May 18th is when Mars will be conjunct Rahu in the sign of Pisces. Okay, so Mars is going to be in the sign of Pisces. Basically, that's where the eclipse just happened. Okay, so let's go ahead and put the chart up again so we can kind of look at that. I keep moving that chart around. All right, let me clean that up. So just like where the eclipses are, this is where Mars. So Mars is going to be here. And on May 18th, Mars is going to be conjunct Rahu. Remember, transiting Rahu's there. And then on May 21st or May 25th is when Mars is going to be crossing the eclipse degree. I'm going to draw a line right there, but this is 26 degrees, okay? And that's going to be crossing the eclipse degree, which can be an important indicator of intense events and karmas that are being triggered. So that's really something to consider when we're looking at this. All right, so let's go back to the slideshow here. So remember, when Mars is conjunct Rahu on May 18th, think about everything that Mars represents is being exaggerated. Okay, so Mars represents anger, movement, change, conflict, increased energy. Okay, it can represent volatile emotions, but it can also represent things like change, transformation, because it rules the natural 8th house of Scorpio. Okay, so all those things are being amplified on May 18th. This is going to be an intense energy. Then on May 25th, if it's not already amplified enough, it hits the eclipse degree. And that's going to be Mars crosses the eclipse degree of the April 8th eclipse. And remember, the path of totality happened in the United States. This is an event trigger. Considering the circumstances, we are likely to see, like I said in the slide, rapid events. This is going to be an intense summer. Okay, this is going to be, I think, one thing after another. This is going to be a lot of buildup here. We could be seeing a lot of things. For example, in 2020, there was, a lot of social unrest that happened around that time. We could see another wave of that this summer. So that's something to think about. Now, okay, the other thing that I want to talk about, and that was the last slide. For some reason, I thought there was another slide. Let's talk about that. The Mars transit's also opposing a Saturn. So let's go ahead and take that up one more time. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the chart here. So let me clean that up. So remember, we're saying now Mars is already in the sign of Pisces. Okay, remember it entered there April 21st. So the trigger dates where there's going to be these intense, really explosive energies are going to be, again, May 18th and May 25th. So let me write that down again. But look at so Mars is in direct opposition of Saturn. Okay, Saturn, natal Saturn in the USA chart. So these are two very different energies. We have to consider that when we're thinking about this. Is Mars can represent a lot in a lot of ways. It could represent the students because Mars represents like vitality, young people. It represents pioneer innovation, and then Saturn represents like the old order, the old fixed order that doesn't want to change. So they're in direct opposition to each other. As and this is for the whole Mars transit, but it's going to be intense, especially on those trigger dates. Okay, so we could see some really intense events for the in May. So isn't it interesting that we were able to look at, the Saturn transit in Aquarius is already bringing up a cost of living crisis, a reformation in the economy, and also a reformation in politics because what the 11th house represents. Then we have the eclipses, and then we have the Mars heading over the path of where the eclipses happen. So we're in for a very volatile summer. I feel like we're going to see an increase of these energies, as far as more, the commencements I know are coming up at a lot of these universities. So, I mean, we could be seeing things beyond, even the end of semester at these universities. So definitely this is going to be a very intense summer. And I feel like we are living through historical times. So it's going to be important to really watch those events as they happen. Now, let me know what you all think down below. Comment. I know this was kind of a longer presentation. I really wanted to deep dive and explain to you kind of all of the background of what's happening because this is very historical. And now that you see all the planets, you probably realize that, yeah, we're living in some intense times right now. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.